Guantanamo Bay, a name soaked in controversy, synonymous with human rights abuses, and known worldwide for what many call a legal black hole. But now, it's in the headlines for an entirely new reason. The US government has announced that Guantanamo Bay will be used to house 30,000 undocumented immigrants, turning a place of indefinite detention into what they claim will be a safe place until they are sent back from whence they came. But can a place built on imprisonment, secrecy, and suffering ever truly become a sanctuary? This isn't just another chapter in Guantanamo's history. This is history repeating itself. And today, we're exposing the full story. How Guantanamo came to be, its brutal past, and what its future might hold. The US lease that never ends. To understand why Guantanamo exists, we have to go back to 1898. As part of its victory in the Spanish-American War, the US took control of Guantanamo Bay and, by 1903, signed a lease agreement with Cuba. That lease, still in place today, gave the US control of 45 square miles of Cuban land, with no expiration date. This means Cuba technically owns Guantanamo Bay, yet the US continues to control it indefinitely. In protest, Fidel Castro refused to cash US lease payments after taking power in 1959. For decades, Cuba has insisted that Guantanamo belongs to them, but the US never left. From naval stronghold to refugee camp, for years, Guantanamo served as a key naval base, fueling America's military power in the Caribbean. But in the 1990s, its purpose shifted. Tens of thousands of Haitian and Cuban refugees fleeing persecution and poverty were intercepted at sea and held at Guantanamo, living in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. The world watched as thousands of innocent people, men, women, and children, were detained in limbo. It was a humanitarian crisis, but what came next would be even worse. Guantanamo's darkest chapter, the post-9/11 prison. Then came 9/11, and everything changed. In 2002, Guantanamo Bay became a high-security detention center, a place where suspected terrorists were held indefinitely, without trial, without rights. The Bush administration labeled these men enemy combatants, claiming that US laws did not apply to them. This meant they could be imprisoned without charges, tortured without accountability, and forgotten without consequences. Inside Guantanamo, detainees endured sleep deprivation, extreme stress positions, and brutal force feedings. Some were held for years without trial, and some had never committed a crime at all. One detainee, Shaker Amer, spent 13 years locked away without charge, even though he had been cleared for release. His crime? Simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And here's something chilling. Owning a Casio F91W watch, yes, a simple wristwatch, was enough to get some men detained. US intelligence claimed that terrorists had used the watch to time bomb detonations. But think about it. How many innocent people own that same watch? The Fight for Justice human rights groups and international organizations condemned Guantanamo. The United Nations called it a site of unparalleled notoriety, demanding its closure. The US Supreme Court stepped in, ruling that detainees had the right to challenge their imprisonment. But by then, Guantanamo had already changed the rules of war. Doctors were instructed to monitor prisoners' vital signs as they were tortured, even force-feeding hunger strikers, practices condemned by the World Medical Association. The horrors of Guantanamo were undeniable. But even after multiple US presidents vowed to shut it down, it remained open. From terrorist prison to immigrant detention center, Fast forward to today. The number of detainees has dropped to just 4 men. But rather than closing Guantanamo for good, the US has found a new use for it, housing 30,000 undocumented immigrants. The same facility that was once infamous for indefinite detention, torture, and human rights violations will now be repurposed for those who will be processed and sent back to their homelands. But here's the problem. This isn't the first time the US has detained migrants in Guantanamo. And here's the worst part. The US is yet to say how long these immigrants will be held there. How long before they too become prisoners of a system that refuses to let them go. Here are 4 chilling facts you probably didn't know. 1. Guantanamo costs over $540 million a year to maintain. 2. The US once considered using Guantanamo for drug war prisoners. In the 1980s, there were talks of detaining drug traffickers there. 3. More journalists have been to North Korea than Guantanamo. The US severely limits media access to the facility. 4. Many detainees were sold to the US for bounty money. Afghan warlords and Pakistani officials turned in innocent men for cash rewards. Guantanamo Bay was never meant to be a home. It was built to be a prison. And now, as thousands of undocumented immigrants are sent there, we have to ask, is history repeating itself? Are we witnessing the start of another human rights disaster? Or is this the moment where we finally say, enough? Please subscribe to our channel today if you haven't already. You can also check out other videos on this channel, Impacting Jamaica.